Wow. Very.
Are you going to be standing here?
No, I'm not.
How was it?
It's filming now.
You were whatever.
You're back.
Okay.
Some chauffeurs around here.
Yeah, and you're leaving again.
Okay.
When are you leaving?
Enjoy it.
Okay, good morning, everybody.
Do you have our phone numbers and our contact?
Keep bringing commercials.
No class next week.
They're coming. They're in the other room waiting.
Welcome our employee from the mail room. Careful.
You know, I'm going to go sit across from you.
Parshat
We're looking
Yisro.
forward to see it.
Yitro arrives in the wilderness as our ancestors are standing there by Mount Sinai. Yitro is a father-in-law, and therefore he comes with advice. He is critical of the system that at that time was used for guiding the people of Israel by Moshe on monetary issues, on social issues, and he makes a recommendation of a structure, a judicial structure, a judicial system that we eventually adapt. The portion tells us that Yitro returns to his nation, and rabbinic tradition notes that he was inspired by the event that occurred at that mountain, and therefore he made his way back to bring his family members along on the journey, on the spiritual journey of the people of Israel. Eventually his descendants settle in the land of Israel and are given a lot. That's what we are told. If you turn to page 400, we have a description of the people of Israel arriving at the location of Har Sinai. And in verse 3, Moshe Allah El Elokim, Moshe ascends the mountain up to God. And he tells him, guide the people of Israel that you should know, you have seen, page 402, the incredible things I did in Egypt. I have carried you on the wings of eagles and brought you here, a metaphor to the God who takes care of us, a metaphor that was used in the future that the Yemenite Jews, who never saw anything that relates to modern technology, their introduction to modernity, to electricity, were the big planes that carried them in 48 and 49 and 50 from Yemen to the land of Israel. And for them it was foreign. It was quite foreign. It was hard for them to believe that anything could fly. And they identified it as the Kanfei Nesharim, the wings of eagles. A friend of mine, a Yemenite, told me that his grandparents, when they were on the plane, they just boarded them without seats. They were just sitting on the floor. They decided that they're going to cook something. So they pulled out, they had some kind of fire, and they started and told the staff of the airline, tell them that it's not a good idea, actually, to do so. So now they adapt fast. They adapted very fast to modernity in many ways. Moshe Dayan shares the story that one time he was driving in the early 50s, and he saw a Yemenite Jew with his family, and he decided to give them a ride. So he gives them a ride, and Moshe Dayan writes that he was thinking to himself, these people, how incredible is it that a year ago they saw absolutely nothing, and now they are in a car that can move fast. And then the Yemenite Jew turns to him and says to him, radio! Like, where's the radio? In other words, where's your radio? And I realize that they pick up very fast of what the needs are in a modern world. The Kanfei Nesharim. And the Almighty tells us that you should know, if you observe, if you tune into the ordinances, you are going to be a nation that is a sgula, treasure for the Almighty. And we are going to be, in verse 6, a mamlechet kohanim, the Goy Kadosh, a kingdom of ministers and a holy nation. We have the responsibility of acting like priests. We are not chosen for our sake, we are chosen for the sake of humanity. We have a mission of becoming the educators to the human race, and that took place at Mount Sinai. But at the same time, we have to realize that when you are an educator, there's always that danger that you're going to be affected by the environment you teach in. And therefore, you have to retain holiness to retain your identity. So therefore, the verse tells us that you are going to be both a nation of priests, but at the same time, a holy nation. You will retain your identity, and that's always that balance that we are dealing with in the exile, that on the one hand, we do have that desire to reach out and relate to humanity, to elevate them, but we know very well that if we move those boundaries aside, our identity is going to vanish. So how do you go ahead and protect yourself while at the same time inspire? Very, very difficult, very, very challenging. We will only truly achieve it in the Messianic era in our homeland, where we have that natural protection during that era of clarity. So now he tells the people about it. They are informed that the mountain has sanctity. So please turn to page 404. And he warns them, listen, they're gonna experience, and they're going to see this incredible revelation, and it will be natural for them to have this urge, to have this desire to ascend the mountain. They want to get closer to the source of light. And therefore, there's a serious warning here given in verse 12 on page 404. Vehigbalta et ha'am, set boundaries for the people. Set boundaries. Don't go beyond those boundaries. And le'emor, the boundaries themselves should be saying, should warn, Hishamru lachem. Be very, very cautious. Beware. Alot bahar, not to dare ascend the mountain or even touch its edge. And kol hanogea bahar, if anyone touches the mountain, they will surely die. This is the revelation of God. Beyond our boundaries, we do not go. Now, they are told at the end of verse 13 that you should know, and this is crucial here, that there's going to be a time in the future where it is indeed permissible to ascend the mountain. And that is Bimshoch HaYovel, when you will hear the blast of the shofar, Hema Ya'alu Bahar, they, look at the translation, may ascend the mountain. So therefore it is permissible today to ascend Har Sinai if we know where it is. I got, when I was 13, on the day of my bar mitzvah, I was going on a tour, and the tour guide gave me a gift. His gift was a stone from Har Sinai. We were not in Sinai, but he gave me a small stone from Har Sinai, and he told me that there's a tradition that every single stone from that mountain is imprinted with an image of the burning bush. And he showed me, I still have it at home, perhaps it should be brought for show and tell. There's a little image of the stone, and he showed me that even if you break the stone, it is imprinted through and through by the Almighty. That's a tradition that they have. Perhaps yes, perhaps no, but the stone is nevertheless sitting at home. There is no sanctity to that mountain. It is not like the Temple Mount today, where you have to have an awareness what areas you could walk up to and what areas not, and what areas demand some kind of purification, which areas not. Har Sinai, if indeed we would know, if we do know, they do argue that they know where it is, not relevant to us, not significant to us, because Bimshoch HaYovel, after they hear the blast of the shofar, Hema Ya'alu Bahar, they may ascend the mountain. Now, if you would read those words, Hema Ya'alu Bahar, on its own, without the translation, how do you translate it?
It's a command.
It sounds more like a command. Hema Ya'alu Bahar. It sounds, it doesn't have to be, but if the simple reading seems to indicate some kind of command, which I don't think it was, but the language must be teaching us something as well, and that's something we have to understand. Now, when did they hear this blast of a shofar that ended the sanctity of the mountain? So let's run through some history here. They leave Egypt, Passover. They reach Har Sinai, Rosh Chodesh, Sivan. They experience the revelation, what we call Kabbalat Torah, which was not exactly the Kabbalat Torah. It's not that Moshe walked back down with the art scroll, Blue Chumashim, and handed them out. The book was not complete because most of the events recorded in the Chumash are going to be written over the next 40 years. but rather when we talk about the revelation at Sinai, it is the fact that the people of Israel had clarity that moment that anything they will be hearing from the mouth of Moshe from that point on is the will of God. Shechina medaberet mitoch grono. God is speaking through his mouth. So that was the clarity. They reached the level of prophecy to understand that the will of God will be presented to them through Moshe. That was really what the revelation was about. And yes, perhaps they heard the Aseret HaDibrot. Perhaps they understood it. Obviously, they heard sounds. How much did they really understand of the Aseret HaDibrot? Not so clear. There's a debate if they really heard all 10. Perhaps they only heard 2. Perhaps they only heard a sound, some incredible sound, and Moshe had to explain it to them. Different explanations given. But what the revelation taught them was the significance of Moshe. So that happens on the holiday of Shavuos. After that, Moshe Rabbeinu ascends the mountain, spends 40 days there to walk back and come back with the tablets. The tablets, which was a supernatural entity that was supposed to be with them for eternity, to inspire them for generations to come, to give them clarity. Unfortunately, the day he returns on the 17th of Tammuz, the people of Israel are worshiping the golden calf. It's broken. He tests them. He spends an additional 40 days, according to some, on the top of the mountain again, praying for the welfare of the people of Israel. Others say he remained with them. But what we do know is that Rosh Chodesh Elul, meaning we jump forward from the 17th of Tammuz to Rosh Chodesh Elul. So if he ascends the mountain back on the 18th, he could come back down on the 29th of Av. Rosh Chodesh Elul, he ascends the mountain either for the second or the third time, and he prays to the Almighty, and it was a period of mercy. The Almighty was willing to accept the tshuva of the people of Israel. It was an experience of forgiveness and atonement. And finally, at the end of those 40 days, on the 10th day of Tishrei, the Almighty declares, Salachti, that I have forgiven the people of Israel. He gives them the second tablets, not with a big show, right? I mentioned the fact that in Mexico, when as a child I lived in Mexico, and at a birthday party, there was an alta minig Yisrael, very, very old minig Yisrael, called the piñata. And the piñata was, here they charge ridiculous prices for it. I'm not recommending it. But in Mexico, everyone had a piñata. It was much, much cheaper. And they would blindfold the birthday boy or the birthday girl, give them a stick, and they would be swinging it, and everyone would, you know what a piñata is? You fill it with candy, right? I would want it to be filled with bottles of wine, but I don't think that would work. So you fill it with candy and nash, and you hang it, and it's made from a cardboard that is to break after a few strikes. It breaks. All the kids go ahead and grab the candy that is on the floor, and they're all happy. So my experience as a kid was that the piñata candy, I would get absolutely nothing from it. The reason being, everybody would be jumping. After the beating the candy took from the stick, in additional the beating it took from the kids jumping all over it, there was nothing good left.
It's like our shul.
It was
like our shul when they have a bar mitzvah or something.
Okay, nothing is left. It was a massive scene, excitement. The video was, or the pictures were being taken, or the 8 millimeter camera was rolling. A lot of excitement, but I walked away with nothing. At the end of the party, they would give out shashtil, no big pictures, a little bag with goodies, and that's what I would take home. That was my experience as a child in Mexico, and that's what happened at Har Sinai, if you think about it. The first revelation, when they were supposed to get the first tablets, a lot of excitement, right? Fireworks, special effects, everything was flying. What did they walk away with? Nothing, broken lochos. The Yom Kippur, there was no fenders, there were no, Moshe walks down, a quiet day, he probably didn't eat breakfast that day, it wasn't a big to-do. We walked away with the luchos. Very, very similar to that event. What happens on the day after Yom Kippur? What are the people of Israel told to do? Start collecting goods, items, precious metals, wood, material, talent as well for the building of the Mishkan. According to rabbinic tradition, they had the material ready already by Kislev, by Chafei Kislev, they already had it ready. But the actual construction begins right after Yom Kippur, and it ends Rosh Chodesh Nisan, 6 months later. And that is already close to a year after the Exodus. They still remain at Har Sinai for another month and a half until the 20th of Iyar, the a year and a month after the Exodus. That's when they leave Mount Sinai. That's the history, and the question is this blast that is described here. Bimshoch hayovel hema ya'alu bahar. When did that blast occur? Two approaches can be given. Approach number one is that occurred on Yom Kippur. At the end of Yom Kippur, there was a blast. God, the Almighty, hands Moshe Rabbeinu set 2 of the luchot. He leaves the mountain. At the end of the day, the sanctity and the significance of the mountain is over. So there's a blast at the end of Yom Kippur. Rings a bell? That's what we do at the end of our Yom Kippur, that we have a blast. The blast is to commemorate the fact that the presence, the Shekhinah of God, has returned back to heaven. That's explanation number one. So according to this explanation, the day after Yom Kippur, there is no longer sanctity to the mountain. That's explanation number one. Ibn Ezra has a different approach. He is of the opinion that until the Mishkan is functional, until this new domain for the Rabbanu Shalom Kiviyachol, this new domain is functional, some level of sanctity remains on Har Sinai. And therefore, the blast only takes place when they are constructing when the tabernacle is ready, meaning on the eve of the first day of Nisan. So he delays the blast, and Ibn Ezra is of the opinion that sanctity remained upon the mountain during the period of time that they are preparing, they are collecting, they are using their talent to construct the Mishkan. 2 approaches to how long the sanctity remained. So far, so good? Mm-hmm. Now, if I take approach number 1, and I think that is something that's a simpler approach because it's part of our tradition. I don't know of anyone that blows a shofar 2 weeks before Pesach. I know you blow other things. You blow your top, you blow a stovetop, you blow a lot, blow fuses, but you don't blow a shofar 2 weeks before Pesach on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. I am familiar with every single shul in the world blowing the shofar at the end of Yom Kippur, indicating that is part of our tradition, that it is when the Shekhinah returns to heaven and when the Shekhinah returned to heaven. So now I'm going to try to find some significance for the fact that perhaps, as you mentioned, the simple reading of the verse is telling me that after the blast of the shofar, at the end of Yom Kippur, the people of Israel perhaps had even a commandment to make their way to the mountain. Remember, they were there. Children need to play. Children in the Middle East love running around areas that are rocky and interesting to explore. So my feeling is that on the 11th of Tishrei, the day after Yom Kippur, that mountain was actually a recommended place for hide and seek. That's the feeling I have from what the verse is telling me. Bimshoch hayovel, when they hear the blast of the shofar, hema ya'alu bahar, they should make their way to the mountain. So the question is, what is the message there? That's the question. Now,
What is the purpose?
what's the purpose? There must be some kind of message, some kind of purpose.
Why would that be like a command if it said Hema? If it just said Yalubaya, that's more of a commandment. But Hema, that's not necessarily a commandment.
It's not necessarily. And Art Scroll feels exactly the same you do. But since you could read it in a different way, and the Torah was given to us to read in many different ways to find messages, not just in the simple reading, but Ayin Panim LaTorah. So we have to, or perhaps we could, now come up with a way of figuring out some meaning in it. That's what I want to do, and perhaps the message will resonate. You know, there is a title, and actually it is given to people in Yerushalayim, and that is the title of Yakir Yerushalayim. Yakir Yerushalayim. They label people Miyakirei Yerushalayim. What does that mean? Something that's yakar,
Precious.
precious, a precious member of the Jerusalem community. I think it's a magnificent title. You probably have to live in Yerushalayim first. And then number two, you have to do something that's precious. And I find that in the modern era mentioned, that people get that title, that honor. I think the municipality gives it to people. I don't know, maybe on Yom Yerushalayim, makes sense, perhaps. I find it in rabbinic biographies that they use that title and term to honor people. And it's mentioned in the Talmud. It's mentioned in the Talmud. Where is it mentioned in the Talmud? So the Mishnah in Yuma, it's a Mishnah in the Tractate Yuma, which discusses in detail the service of Yom Kippur. So they talk about what took place in the temple. And among the more difficult services to truly comprehend was the sending of a seir, a he-goat, to a place called Azazel. If you're in Israel, don't tell anyone to go there, right? That's not what you do. What was Azazel? So literally it was some kind of cliff, some sharp cliff. And there, the Torah commands that you designate a person. You designate a person to go ahead and take the he-goat way out of the city of Jerusalem. Way out of the city. About perhaps a 12 kilometer walk on Yom Kippur. So this person would walk out, the service would begin with 2 he-goats presented to the high priest of the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol, and this is all based on what the Torah tells us, would have a lottery where one of the he-goats would be designated La Hashem as a korban in the Beit HaMikdash. The other one would be sent La Azazel. The 2 he-goats were supposed to be similar in their appearance, height, color, value. Symbolizes something of how, all of life, there's no good and bad, it's choices you make, right? What makes a good person? Good choices. What makes a bad person? Bad choices. We have a way of teaching our children that there are evil people and good people, which is absurd. Everybody, if we don't, a good person making bad decisions turns unfortunately into a bad person. That is a crucial moment. There's a lottery. He designates one as a korban. Traditional korban service is done for the he-goat, that's La Hashem. The other one is sent out, La Azazel. The person chosen for that job. It was a blend of an honor, but at the same time, a little bit of a challenging honor. I would have to make this long journey outside of Yerushalayim. He would walk 12 kilometers, but they placed 10 huts on the way. 10 huts on the way. Because Yom Kippur in Israel could be quite hot. You've been there, Sukkot, right? And you could even have a chamsin. So imagine walking 12 kilometers on a fast day in the Middle Eastern heat. And he's walking towards the desert. So they had 10 huts designated on the path. In every hut they placed some food. A refrigerator was there with some food. And if he would need to make his way to the Azazel, he could partake and have a little bit of something to drink. Gemara tells us that it was never needed, because once you psychologically know that you could get something to eat, you don't really need it. That's what the Gemara points out. Now, the Mishnah tells us that as he would leave the temple, there was a serious problem. There were people that were from Chutz La'aretz, from Alexandria, who are not very educated. And what they would do is that they would push and shove the guy. They would say, get out of here. And they would say to him, lech la'azazel, they would say to him. Make your way to the Azazel. Why? Because the moment of atonement for the people of Israel was when this he-goat was pushed over the cliff, and the string, there was a red string that would turn to white as an indication that the Almighty atoned for the people of Israel. So until that moment occurred, that this he-goat was shoved over the cliff, the people of Israel were carrying the burden of sin. The burden of sin no longer was on them the moment that the service was completed. So for the people standing there, they felt the goal was get him there ASAP, so they would shove him, get moving already. And it became, as you can imagine, as things are in the Middle East at times, unsafe, and it became an environment that they had to change. So they created for him a ramp, meaning instead of him having to walk out through an area populated by these people, these raw, uneducated Alexandrian Jews, they created a ramp that he could avoid them. So they built a ramp just to get him away from these troublemakers. That's what we are told. That's statement number 1 of the Mishnah. The Mishnah continues that there were people that before Yom Kippur would leave Yerushalayim and settle in these huts. Why would they settle in these huts? Because this person is making a long journey alone, a difficult journey, perhaps even depressing journey, carrying the sins of the people of Israel. So to uplift him, to give him a psychological boost, to strengthen him, to walk him, because they could not walk the whole distance, it was out of the Tchum Shabbos, but they were able to walk him from hut to hut, to support him and to take care of this fellow. This is the contrast between these Jews that were from Alexandria. Mishnah calls them actually Bavlim, because there was a political need to label them something else. These Jews that were from Chutz La'aretz were uneducated, did not understand the essence of Judaism. They thought that all you got to do is send this guy out to the Azazel and mission accomplished. And then the Mishnah tells us, Miyakirei Yerushalayim, people who were from Yerushalayim, and not just from Yerushalayim. They were the special, the precious Jerusalem people. They would make their way, leave their family Yom Kippur, leave the inspiration of the Temple Mount, and leave the inspiration of the Bet HaMikdash to settle in a hut for 24 hours just to help a fellow Jew who needs a psychological boost. Meyakirei Yerushalayim. So the contrast in the Mishnah is magnificent between someone who the whole religion is about shoving he go down the cliff, seeing some red string, some red wool turn into white and indicate that they are spiritual clean. Someone that takes the whole religion and objectifies the religion and objectifies others. They don't treat this person as a person. How do they treat the person? As an object who is carrying their sin, shoving him vis-a-vis. Who is the Mishnah, who is the Talmud comparing such people to? Yakirei Yerushalayim, the precious people of Yerushalayim, who see a person, who are sensitive to a person and understand that our faith is about being sensitive to the needs of the other. A magnificent contrast, and that is what a Yakir Yerushalayim does. Think about someone else. Another place the Talmud tells us that the Kohen Gadol had to stay up all night. There was a challenge of keeping him up all night. It was a challenge. So there were people in Yerushalayim that would stay up and hum and make noises just to assist the Kohen Gadol for his personal need to stay up. They were always concerned about the welfare of others. That's a Yakir Yerushalayim. And it's a message that we have to always be careful that even when we have holy objects, we have a Sefer Torah and a Shulchan and a Shul and a Bet HaMikdash, all these things are wonderful and indeed significant. Never lose sight. Don't make something even holy into an Avodah Zarah. You can take some object that's extremely important, but that becomes your whole religion. You have to be very, very careful not to allow such a thing to happen in Judaism. Right? You don't go ahead and, due to the fact that you have a stringency on Pesach, to go ahead and insult your in-laws that they're no good because they don't follow it. In other words, there's always that sensitivity you have to have towards the person. Because you could sometimes take religion, even Eretz Yisrael, believe it or not, even Zionism. If it goes beyond the boundary that you start cursing out and publicly saying nasty things about Sharon because you are upset, you have to use your seichel if you have. you have to try to use it. There has to be sensitivity to see the person. That's what our religion is about. And I am inspired. We are told to be inspired by Yakirei Yerushalayim. There's a magnificent story of Rabbi Cheskel Sarna. Now, Rabbi Cheskel Sarna was the head of the Chevron Yeshiva. Very, very bright individual, very inspirational. He made his way to the land of Israel in the 20s. In 1924, in a suburb of the city of Kovna, there was a suburb called Slabotka. Slabotka is a word that's, there's this Gentile I meet, and he said it's a great word, he said, Slabotka. And my grandfather would say it that way, Slabotka. In other words, you let the lip and the jaw. So in Slabotka, in 1924, the Rosh Yeshiva, the Alter, sent 6 young men to open a yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael in the city of Hebron. My grandfather was one of them. And they spent there many years, from 1924 till 1929. 1929, there was a massacre there, quite awful. My grandfather got left a few months earlier for a shidduch, and that's how he survived. Hebron Yeshiva at that time, by the late 20s, was already run to some extent by Rabbi Cheskel Sarna. Bright man, brilliant mind, understood politics, were a gadol b'Torah and in midos, very sensitive person. And he shares a story about a doctor. He, Rabbi Sarna, the Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron, passed away I think around 1970. He shares a story about a doctor, but he starts off his story about Echad miyakirei Yerushalayim. In other words, he is going to label this doctor a Yakir Yerushalayim. So what is the story that merits that the doctor should be labeled as a Yakir Yerushalayim? So Rabbi Cheskel Sarna shares that when he would go visit that doctor for an appointment, again, you didn't call in often, you would just come in and sit in the waiting room. So when the doctor would see Rabbi Cheskel Sarna, he would bring him in to the appointment before others. And it was understood that a person like the Rosh Yeshiva, who's spending every moment taking care of the needs of Klal Yisrael, shouldn't have to wait in the waiting room, and others, more I assume, would forgive the few minutes that the Rosh Yeshiva would spend with Rav Sarna. That was the routine. Rav Sarna walks in, 5, 6 people in the waiting room. When the doctor comes out and sees Rav Sarna, he says, Rav Sarna, please come in. That was the norm. One time, Rav Sarna walks in and sits down, and he expected to be out of there soon. The doctor comes out, looks in the waiting room, and there was a woman there. And he says, Giveret Polki, Tikansi. In other words, he skipped over the Rosh Yeshiva, and allowed the woman in first for her appointment to take care of her needs. Cheskel Sarna was a mature adult, understood that there must be a reason, sat there and he waited. He didn't mind, he understood that there must be a reason. The woman leaves, Rav Sarna is then called in, and the doctor says, I apologize, but let me explain to you the situation. This woman, that just came, she's an almana, her husband passed away. She doesn't have a penny. So of course I treat her, I wouldn't take a penny from her. It's a mitzvah. But I was concerned that if I would come out, and she was the one that was next in line, and instead of taking her, I would take you, she would assume that it is because I am not paying, the doctor is not treating me with respect and takes someone else. So due to that concern, I decided to take her, that not to hurt her feelings. That's what Rav Sarna shares. Yakirei Yerushalayim, in other words, the person who senses the need of and sees the person, not the object. We sometimes allow religion to turn into an object. That is a Yakir Yerushalayim, an incredible story indeed. When we collect for the building of a tabernacle or for a temple, which is extremely significant in our faith, we need at the same time a reminder that it is not the object that is holy, but it is an object that links us to God and links us to Torah and links us to the values of Torah and links us to the values of being sensitive to others. We need a reminder that the sanctity is not intrinsic, but extrinsic. It is due to the fact that there are others that sanctify the temple. The holiness of the Mishkan, it could vanish. It could be like nothing if God decides to remove it. It is not that the Mishkan is holy on its own temples, right? Even people, by the way, there's a danger of people being worshipped. We in our faith have to be very, very careful not to worship people. You have to learn from educators, you have to be inspired by leaders, but if we have a culture where we worship the leader, we are corrupting Judaism. That's very, very dangerous to make a person into an avodah zarah. You always have to have that balance of respect to a Gadol Yisrael, but at the same time realize that he's a human being. He's a human being, and a human being can make a mistake. If you worship the Gadol, you know what the problem is? That if the Gadol has a bad day, and he says something wrong to you, right? You think that it must be that I'm wrong, because of God, the object that is worshipped said the wrong thing. We have to be a very balanced religion. And God needs to place reminders in our faith that sanctity could be placed by God, but could be removed by God. Right? And you become beloved if you value the human. And therefore, I could return to Har Sinai. The day after Yom Kippur, the 11th of Tishrei. The 11th of Tishrei is a very significant day because they begin their journey. They begin the process of collecting goods, metals, material, wood for the construction of the tabernacle of the Mishkan, making their contribution through talent, very artistic, to make a home for God. So the natural tendency would be at that time that we're making a home for God, a Mishkan, we're going to worship. This home becomes like God. Very, very dangerous in Judaism. That is like God. So God needs to remind us that you should know that I can place my presence somewhere, but then just remove it and make it like anywhere else. And therefore, that day designated for the building of the Mishkan is the same day God wants us Hema Ya'alu Bahar, to make their way, that the kids should play hide and seek on the exact same mountain that a few months ago we heard Aseret HaDibrot. Imagine the impact on the child. That here I am playing a game, right? Playing with stones, building, or whatever kids do on a mountain in the Middle East. They are doing it on the exact same location where a few months ago they heard the voice of God, where yesterday Moshe Rabbeinu was there on the holiest day of the year receiving the luchos. Today we're playing a game. What's the message? The location is not what's holy. It is God that is holy, and He can elevate a place. And therefore never worship a Mishkan. Never worship an object, and never worship the mitzvos. The mitzvos are tools. They're not the essence. They are tools to connect to Rabbanu Shalom. And remember what the real values of Judaism are. Don't become like those Jews from Alexandria, which would beat up a person, shove a person, because he is carrying, quote-unquote, our sins. Don't be like that. Be like a Yakir Yerushalayim that sees the other human being. That perhaps is the message of what we are told here. B'imshach hayovel, Hema Ya'alu Bahar. A little bit of an insight. I thank you for coming. No class next week. Be'ezrat Hashem, I'll be somewhere else. But we see in doing say Schem L'Shalom to the wolves. How long are you going for?